And we'll go ahead and give folks just a couple more minutes to join. It looks like we've got a few commissioners that are hopping on as well. Thanks for holding on, folks, just for a couple minutes. I want to make sure that we don't have anyone here in our attendees list that needs to be promoted. All right. And start with our normal script for our folks in the audience, if you want to call it that. I didn't hear from you, but I'll go ahead and do that real quick while we've got folks joining us. I just muted myself. I told myself I wouldn't do that this meeting on accident again. All right, let's start that again. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this month's Eugene Sustainability Commission meeting. We're very happy to have you here. We've got lots of great important things to talk about today. For those of you who are joining via computer, device, or phone, your microphone, webcam, and phone are automatically muted when you enter the meeting as an attendee. Or unmute your video at will. But we do ask that if you're not speaking, please do mute your mic. Apologies for my coworker here in the background. But please do mute yourself when you're not speaking. That way we can cut down on noise and feedback. We will have a public comment portion of the meeting. So if you've not already done so, here are some instructions about how to raise your hand now to get into the speaker's queue. For those that are viewing the meeting on a computer, laptop, or other device, you can click on the blue hand icon to raise your hand. Again, that will place you in the queue. If we have anyone listening over the phone, which it doesn't look like, but just in case, you can press *9. That will also place you in the queue. I will lower hands as speakers are called upon. When the public comment period begins, Zach Mulholland will announce the next 2 speakers at a time. When it's your turn, he will announce your name and I will unmute your microphone. You'll have 2 minutes to speak, after which I will also mute your microphone once again. Just want to remind folks that the Q&A functionality of Zoom and the chat function are not available for our attendees. So panelists, commissioners, I do ask you to not use that if you can avoid it, except for technical purposes, as our attendees do not have access to that list. Lastly, in the recent passing of House Bill 4212, these meetings are recorded, and you can find the recording on the Commission's website. You can also send, an email for more information about that. Thank you again for your time listening to this piece. If you have questions, as always, you can email the Sustainability Commission using the message, the Sustainability Commission button on the Commission's website. And with that,
hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Commissioners and guests, looking forward to a really great presentation tonight on fossil fuel risk bonds and then more commission business. To start off, we just have a few kind of quick items to get through. So first is agenda and then the minutes, and then we'll have public comment and then jump into our presentation. So to start off with, are there any proposed changes to the agenda? Seeing none, can we have a motion and a second?
I move we accept the agenda.
I second.
Okay, all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, and all opposed? And any abstentions? Okay, next up is the minutes. Are there any changes to the minutes from last month? Okay. Again, seeing none, can we have a motion and a second?
Move to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor, please raise your hand. Oops, any opposed? And any abstentions? Okay, next up we have public comment. So if you are interested in maybe making public comment, please raise your hand and we will call on you in a moment.
So real quick, while folks might be, I don't see any hands up at the moment. So if folks want to get in the queue for that, John, I did want to let you know that I sent you a chat to let you know about the screen share issue. I'm not able to actually change the permissions. So if you're able to email me your presentation, I could email address in the chat box.
Okay, well that my file sizes tend to be too big for email.
Okay. If you have it in a Dropbox link,
Yeah.
link, I could possibly pull it from there.
Okay, well, let me get on that. So
Sure. Sorry
just
about that.
check out for a minute or two.
And Zach, it doesn't look like we have anyone that's raised their hand for public comment.
Okay, I mean, we could try and jump ahead for something. It sounds like, I think we were going to get going at 5:45, so I don't want to necessarily start before then.
Sure. If you want to, perhaps what we could do is we could break up some of the committee updates if folks wanted to start with that, or we could wait just a couple of minutes to see if we can get the presentation in order, or we could also move commissioner updates up if they'd like to share in the meantime.
Yeah, why don't we just do commissioner updates?
Sure.
And then we can, if there's time or for staff or council updates, and we can just, as we get the meeting, hopefully ready to go at 5:45. Are there any commissioner updates kind of that we weren't going to cover in our already set agenda? Okay, I'll just let you all know, I got to meet with some of the members of the Active Transportation Committee last week. And then they, or about a week and a half ago, and then they voted last week on a letter to actually support our funding recommendation that we passed last month. So they're going to be sending a letter to the city council through staff in support of our recommendation. So that's very exciting. And hopefully we'll get to chat with some, they were interested in maybe doing like a quarterly meeting. So I'm hoping that in the future, if folks are interested, we can have some type of a quarterly like leadership meeting with the Active Transportation Committee members. Councilor Semple, do you have any council updates? Do you want to go ahead and give those now? And that way we don't have to do it at the end? Not to put you on the spot.
Looks like you're muted. I know.
I unmute and then it mutes itself. Gremlins. I don't really have much to report. I'm sad to say the Northwest Natural franchise is, you know, we're not going to have one. It's still being worked on, but Sarah's doing most of that negotiations and we haven't had a report, so I don't have a report to give you. Really haven't been talking about the climate much, which is distressing. Homelessness, and it just seems to be more and more of a crisis every day. Had a meeting with Sarah and Councilor Groves and Ye that we need to be more urgent, bigger in our response. It's really complicated. So we're on break, which just means that we don't have council meetings. We still have everything else. So I wish I had more to tell you, but I don't. So on with the show. Thanks.
I guess one other quick update is that council is supposed to at some point discuss basically a request from us to present our recommendations in person. And I think that got kicked back, that conversation back to early April.
And it got changed today to the 19th instead of the 12th because of the emergency homeless situation. It seems like I should just put in a work poll for the large event waste, because I don't think we're gonna get to it in a timely manner, and it's past timely. So do you want me to do that? I know the mayor's saying, oh, wait until we talk about this. But the worst that what can happen is we approve it and we were gonna do it anyway, or we don't approve it, which that seems unlikely. So I'll go ahead and do that but if people
Looks
want
like
me.
he has her hand raised.
Yeah, one of the updates we had from staff was actually about something that one of our panelists can speak to. Kaylee, would you be okay speaking to the Environmental Justice Summit coming up? We wanted to let folks know and have them sign up.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, my internet was kind of cutting out, so I'm just talking about the EJP Summit. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so thanks everyone for having me on here again. I'm Haley, for those who might not know. So I'm the Climate Advisory Committee Chair for the county, and I'm also the Climate Justice Grassroots Organizer for Beyond Toxics and the NAACP Eugene Springfield. And we are getting ready to launch our Environmental Justice Pathways Summit on April 9th and 10th. And so it's going to be a completely online virtual summit. It's free of charge. We have partnered with the Climate Change and Indigenous Peoples lecture at the University of Oregon, which I'm really excited about. And so our keynotes include Dr. Mustafa Santiago Ali, and then we're also featuring Sheila Watt-Cloutier, an Indigenous researcher. And I can put the registration link in the chat, but you can also find more information on the Beyond Toxics website. And we're just getting ready to launch our EJP Summit website, so I won't share that link just yet, but I can make sure to send updates out to everyone. And so that's my quick update there. Thank you, Chelsea.
Thanks, Haley. I also wanted to, while we have a couple seconds left here, just remind folks, this will be my staff update, but just remind folks of the belonging training that's coming up on Monday at 5:30. I was going to send out a reminder link for registration here at your next weekly reminder going out tomorrow. So just wanted to flag that for your attention, that that's going to be available. And also wanted to let you know that recruitment for the commission, we've got several applications in for the seats that are available. So we'll find out more information about that here shortly. And that is all of the updates that I had. I was also going to mention the upcoming summit. So I'm glad we have Haley here to talk to us directly about that. It's a special treat. All right. Zach, I just want to flag, is there anything else that folks need to check in about, either from the commission or otherwise?
I think we can loop back at the end. I'm excited to get the presentation started.
Awesome.
Laura, do you want to introduce folks and take us away?
Sure, thanks. I want to really thank John Telberth and Daphne Weisham for joining us tonight to talk about fossil fuel risk bonds. I'll let them, you guys all saw their bios in the invite, so I'm not going to read those. And we hopefully are having some of the county commissioners join. We had several RSVPs, and I know one of the counselors is coming late, but there should be some more people joining in who are really interested in the presentation. So I think we'll just start. Anyone else? We had a committee that organized this. So if anyone else, if I'm forgetting to say anything, wants to jump in. Art, I don't know if you want to say anything. Okay, great. So thank you for joining us tonight.
Great, well, it's good to be here. So Samantha, I'm going to try to share screen, and we'll see if that works. Does everybody see that?
Yes.
Great. Okay, well, let me go ahead and maximize it. So good evening. Thanks for having me here. And, you know, it is St. Patrick's Day, and I do have Irish heritage. So I feel like I should be out in a pub, but in this COVID age, you know, being at a Eugene Sustainability Commission is like the next best thing. So thanks for having me. So in 2016, my center, the Center for Sustainable Economy, published a report describing a simple policy mechanism for dealing with the exponential rise of economic damages from fossil fuel infrastructure and climate change. And we call that policy program Fossil Fuel Risk Bond Programs. And so tonight I'm going to take a quick tour of what that entails and suggest some next steps for Eugene or Lane County to go down this road if it seems a wise thing to do. Now, if you want to download the report, you could just go to the link shown on the screen, or just email me at the address on the first slide here. So let me begin by reminding everyone just how ubiquitous fossil fuel infrastructure is. I mean, this stuff is everywhere in many different sizes and shapes. And it's dangerous, as we all know. Many things can go wrong, and when they do, more often than not, it's federal, state, and local government agencies that pick up the tab and then pass the costs on to taxpayers. You know, Laura Allen forwarded me some statistics from Eugene indicating that 41% of Eugene's public, private, and collegiate schools and 48% of all parks and tens of thousands of residents live and work within a 1 mile blast zone in the event of oil train disasters. So just kind of shows you how serious these risks are. But this infrastructure is dangerous in another sense as well. As we all know, it drives climate change. Our consumption of fossil fuels would not happen without this vast infrastructure network in place. And climate change is, of course, the world's greatest market failure, forcing governments at every level to squeeze taxpayers again by shelling out trillions of dollars each year, responding to climate disasters, or investing in climate adaptation. According to the UN's most recent assessment, the cost of achieving climate stability has been priced out at between 1.6 and $3.8 trillion per year and is rising every year we delay bold climate action. And so the justification for fossil fuel risk bond programs is that they are one way governments can correct this market failure by shifting the costs and risks of dangerous infrastructure back to where it belongs, on the polluters, not on the taxpayers. So before we get into details, it's important to talk a little bit about what are these costs and risks. And so they kind of fall into two general categories for purposes of the fossil fuel risk bond program. The first category includes costs and risks that can be traced back to the operation of individual fossil fuel infrastructure elements with corporate owners who can be identified and held liable. Think of these as point source costs and risks. They include risks and costs associated with accidents, spills, explosion, pollution, localized pollution, and abandoned infrastructure, which is a major issue nationwide. The second category of risks and costs are more difficult to trace back to individual elements or owners, but are instead generated by the cumulative effects of all fossil fuel operations taken together. Think of these as non-point source and costs and risks. They include, of course, climate change and all its various costs, but they also include groundwater and surface water and air pollution, earthquake swarms that happen to be in places where there's a lot of fracking activity, infrastructure stress in places where the fossil fuel industry has boomed. It's placing enormous financial toll on highways and infrastructure, and economic instability as well. That boom and bust economy creates a lot of costs, unemployment and such for local agencies. So we'll get into these in more detail of how our fossil fuel risk bond program addresses these risks, but it does it through two basic mechanisms we'll get to in a minute. So what are the fossil fuel risk bond programs exactly, and how do they work, and how do they help solve this problem of this massive market failure? So in the way of a succinct definition, fossil fuel risk bond programs are systematic efforts by state and local governments to evaluate and respond to the financial risks they face at each stage of the fossil fuel product life cycle in their jurisdiction. Now, there are two basic approaches for internalizing these risks. Number one, conventional financial assurance mechanisms, such as surety and performance bonds and insurance. And secondly, fossil fuel risk trust funds, which are capitalized through surcharges on all fossil fuel transactions in a given economy. More details will come in a moment. The important point for now is that fossil fuel risk bond programs can help with the cost of climate adaptation and a just transition away from fossil fuels in 4 distinct ways. Number one, by providing funding for climate adaptation and mitigation, including the financing needed for renewable energy transition. Number two, by establishing pools of funds available for the eventual dismantling of fossil fuel infrastructure and cleanup of damaged sites so that they can be restored for future beneficial uses. Number three, by ensuring that the public is no longer on the hook for the substantial economic costs the fossil fuel industry now externalizes onto all of us, thereby freeing up funds that would otherwise be needed to deal with the costs that are left behind. And number four, providing just enough of a financial barrier to deter new fossil fuel infrastructure investment and speed the closure and exit of risky operations. So these risk bond programs have a lot of payoff in terms of public finance. It's the bottom line. So let's get into some more details about how the fossil fuel risk bond program could be operationalized. And we're going down this road in several jurisdictions we'll talk about in a few minutes. So for discrete risks that are assignable to specific entities, financial assurance requirements should be added as a required stipulation for all existing and future permits. The best available science and economics should be used as a basis for establishing financial assurance amounts. And as new science comes in, the required amounts can be adjusted. Reasonable worst case scenarios should provide the basis of setting financial assurance amounts. For generalized risks assignable to all fossil fuel entities operating in a given jurisdiction, fossil fuel risk trust funds should be set up and capitalized by a surcharge on the carbon dioxide content embodied in all fossil fuel transactions that go back and forth in a local economy. The levy would be based on what the jurisdiction expects to pay out for climate-related damages at least 50 years into the future. Trust funds, like all other trust funds, would be invested and managed to earn returns, but tapped when needed to finance adaptation expenses, climate disaster response, such as the recent wildfires, and transitioning to renewable energy. So again, just to put it in more visual terms, which risks trigger which mechanisms? So financial assurance mechanisms are best used to guard against the costs of accidents, routine and catastrophic spills, pollution, explosions, and abandoned infrastructure, all traceable to an individual entity. Fossil fuel risk trust funds deal with generalized risks of fossil fuel infrastructure, as well as the costs of climate disasters, climate adaptation, and climate mitigation. So on the financial assurance side of the equation, Washington's Department of Ecology already has a system in place for hazardous waste that can be adapted for use in fossil fuel risk contexts. The specific mechanisms they address include trust funds, letters of credit, insurance, payment bonds, performance bonds, financial tests, and corporate guarantees. And so they've got a whole menu of these financial assurance mechanisms, and which one is appropriate for which entity, for which risk, is something that the program would work out over time. So that's the easier part. The harder part is setting up the fossil fuel risk trust fund, and the lift is going to be harder, but again, there's precedents already in place that can be used as models. For example, the Energy Facility Siting Council in Oregon, and I believe in Washington, already places some kind of levy on emissions for purposes of financing the transition to clean renewable energy. Either way, we believe the trust fund concept is a powerful one for solving climate finance challenges that state and local governments face. So this slide demonstrates what fossil fuel risk trust funds could mean for climate finance using 3 states, Alaska, Maryland, and Texas, as examples. Each state has already determined what they expect to pay out over the next 50 years for climate adaptation. That's kind of the top line here. Now we can convert that into an annualized amount that takes into account the opportunity costs of these investments. You know, if you didn't have to spend money on climate adaptation, you could use that money elsewhere. So annualizing it comes out to these values that represent what should be spent each year to satisfy the adaptation cost obligation through 2050. Then you can kind of divide that by the transactions of fossil fuel in the local economy, converting it to a common metric, which is CO2, and then assigning a levy based on the CO2 content of that trade. And so at the bottom of the screen, you see what the levy per metric ton CO2 should be in the different states to raise enough money to meet the obligations that they expect to incur over the next 50 years. Now we have this other design option called an equitable sharing premium that could be tacked onto the levy to help raise funds in the US to help climate adaptation in other places that weren't really part of the climate, driving climate change in the first place. And we don't have enough time to go into that, but there is an equitable sharing arrangement of these trust funds that we could talk about. So here's what, if you converted that levy into the effect on retail prices in those states, and using Maryland as an example, an adequate fossil fuel risk trust fund surcharge would be in the range of 15 cents per gallon of gas, $6.70 per barrel of oil, and 91 cents per 1,000 cubic feet of natural gas. It's important to note that these would not be borne by consumers, but levied on producers and distributors with specific language in the enabling legislation for the program prohibiting the passing on of such costs to consumers. There's precedent for that in law already, so it shouldn't be a barrier to the Respond program. It's also important to note that in Oregon, levies on liquid transportation fuels may be subject to the constitutional constraints, which require that funds be deposited in the Highway Trust Fund. So the way around this may be to put the levy on capacity, infrastructure capacity, instead of the liquid fuels itself, such as, you have a refinery that has a certain capacity or a pipeline with a certain capacity. You put the levy on the infrastructure capacity, not the fuels, and thereby you don't have to pay that money into the Highway Trust Fund. So that's the basic layout of the fossil fuel Respond program Lane County or the city of Eugene could consider. And if you choose to go that route, there are two key implementation phases we recommend. The first one, phase one, the city or county will commission a risk assessment that includes a detailed inventory of fossil fuel infrastructure that can be subject to the regulations, an analysis of reasonable worst case scenarios for this infrastructure and the resulting impact on public finances, a gap analysis of how much of this risk is covered by existing financial assurance mechanisms or insurance, and finally, recommendations for how to best set up the fossil fuel risk trust fund. So that would be resolution number one. Resolution number two, or ordinance, probably implemented through ordinance, would be actually adopting the regulatory program to put in place the financial insurance requirements and the surcharges. So we're currently working nationally and in several states and counties to make this program happen. Here's a quick update on the right. You can see on a quick update of where we're at nationally in Multnomah County, in the city of Portland, in King County, Washington, Washington State, Illinois at the state level, and in Congress. So it's exciting to see this progress moving forward in so many places. And here's what a Eugene resolution, a phase one resolution, would look like if it kind of mimics the resolution that Multnomah County and King County passed. It would have four basic sections. To make the, it should begin with some key findings in state land use law. These findings are actually pretty important. And the findings would establish the fact of taxpayer liability for fossil fuel infrastructure and climate change, and then commission the risk assessment looking 50 years in the future. There may be federal funds that can be tapped to fund this risk assessment. And then it would move on to the gap analysis of all these costs and risks, how much are covered already, how much do we need to cover through supplemental mechanisms. And then finally, the last part of the initial resolution would be for the relevant agency. I don't know which agency would be relevant in the city of Eugene or Lane County, but they would come back with recommendations on how to best set up this fossil fuel risk trust fund, and maybe just give them a year to do that study. So that's it. So by passing something like this, Lane County and the city of Eugene can begin to turn the tide on the all-important question of who pays for climate change and the many environmental, economic, and social costs of dirty fossil fuel infrastructure. We hope you can partner with us to make this happen. I'd be happy to take any questions right now.
Thank you, John. That was super informative and a lot to digest for, I think some people are new to this and some have read the whole report. So, but that was a great overview and going into some detail. I can't see everybody, so maybe, oh, no, now I can. People want to raise their hands, their virtual hands, and ask any questions.
Laura, I'm happy to help with the hands here if you want to call on people and facilitate that piece.
That would be great. And Commissioner, just, you know, we want to prioritize councilors and county commissioners to do their questions first, since we'll be staying on and can talk more later. So I saw Randy, Randy's hand up first.
Thank you, Laura. Do you have any examples of medium-sized cities like Eugene that have done this, and kind of what the experience has been so far? You know, I'm thinking about communities around Eugene, for example, that don't do it. What does it do to the local economy?
Yeah, unfortunately, this is a pretty brand new concept and program. And you saw the slide where we've got Multnomah County passed the phase 1, King County passed the phase 1, we got legislation. That's as far as we've gotten so far. But we're getting close. Like I said, this summer, both King County and Multnomah County will be getting ready for the phase 2, and then we'll have a lot more information of how this thing could be implemented.
Got it. Well, I mean, even with Portland and Multnomah County, you've got the county that Portland is in. I'm thinking, you know, communities around, you know, like Eugene, for example. If Eugene does it and Springfield doesn't, what does that do?
It's a good question, but like I said, a lot of this, like financial assurance mechanisms, are very local in nature. They're based on whatever risk that facility is presenting to the city. It's not so much a county issue, it's not so much a Springfield issue. So I think that part of the equation works well. And then the city itself is facing a lot of costs related to climate change. So this is the way to help raise money and shift those risks of the climate change costs within the boundaries of the city of Eugene. So that's what I find exciting about this program, is that it's scalable from the city to the county to the state to the, you know, at a federal level. It kind of covers all the bases that way. And a city can implement it without even having to worry about what the state or the city next door is having to do, because it's all about the risk to that particular jurisdiction.
And then my last question, I guess, would be, and thank you for that. My last question would be the trust funds to get it established. Are those established in such a way that they can't be rated for other purposes?
That would be up to you all to establish them, so they can't be rated for other purposes.
Sure, but I mean, I'm just wondering if that's if there's a legal precedent for that.
Yeah, I think if you look at for instance, the state's highway trust fund, they put an iron curtain around that. I don't think there's any reports of that being rated for other purposes, because it's kind of constitutionally based, I suppose. But it's a good question. All of these mechanisms can be gamed, probably, right, at some level. So you always have to be aware of that, and I appreciate that.
The gaming is what worries me, but yeah, just trying to figure. I try to look at the downstream effects on things like this, so that, you know, if we go in this direction, we can at least set it up in a way that preserves the money for what it's intended to do. Yeah,
and the best way to do that is, when you set it up, is to say this fund can only be used for these specific purposes, and these purposes have to be, you know, you have to make the case in these particular ways with these particular metrics. I mean, there's ways to really tighten the screws on
Thank you, John.
I think Daphne wants to chime in, I think.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in. Thanks, John. That was great. One thing that I didn't hear you touching on, and maybe I missed it, but I don't think so, was the seismic risk, which is of critical concern, especially in the Portland metropolitan area, where we have all of the state's fossil fuel infrastructure situated on an earthquake subduction zone in a floodplain on landfill. And so while the climate risk is certainly an urgent concern, in some ways, we're even more concerned here in Oregon in the Pacific Northwest about the seismic risk, given that we're overdue for a major quake. And what we could expect to happen in the event of a major seismic event would be these industries declaring bankruptcy and then leaving the cost back on the public sector. And so in anticipating something that we know is going to happen, which is a major seismic event, we have an opportunity to require that these industries make transparent the risk that they are now externalizing on all of us and post a bond equivalent to that. So it's not just about the climate risk, it's also about the seismic risk and about the risk to the communities that are in the vicinity of that. One thing that we've been trying to sort of get on the radar of the Multnomah County and City of Portland risk assessment is the human health costs and risks, which are enormous. And of course, they are just in phase one of the analysis. So all they're looking at is sort of the point source risks and the risk to the public sector overall. But of course, those risks are another quantum leap up in other risks that are just sort of ongoing and that would be even more serious in the event of a major seismic event like the 9.0 that we may be getting here in the Portland area. I just wanted to flag that because I didn't hear you talk about seismic risk as much, John.
Yeah, well, the cool thing about it is that once you do a risk assessment, you're required to do a worst case scenario for all these facilities. It doesn't matter where the source of the risk comes from. It could be the site, it could be an earthquake, it could be whatever. It's now you've put the vulnerability of this facility on the table and it's from any direction. So it's a good point because the earthquake risk, at least in the Portland area, might trump anything that might happen at the facility in terms of explosions, et cetera. But it's really good to have that conversation and get that data out there.
Because too often they aren't insured for that level of risk.
Yeah.
And what we're doing is forcing that transparency and saying, look, this is a cost. We know it's coming. We don't want the taxpayer to pay that cost. The polluter should pay that cost. Show us that you can cover that cost. Otherwise, we got to begin a gradual process of phasing you out.
So we have Councilor Surratt, then Councilor Groves again, and then we have some commissioners after that.
Thank you. Sorry for popping in late, and I appreciate the many invitations I got to attend this briefing. And I will try to follow up and look more deeply into it. But if it's possible, there was a report that was referenced. I don't know if that could be sent out to the councilors if it hasn't been already. And the PowerPoint, I don't know if that could also be shared. The question I have, or just, yeah, kind of an understanding you've started this with the City of Portland and Multnomah County, but in our work on our franchise agreement and trying to attach a climate recovery agreement to that, our position with Northwest Natural was we are going to impose a fee on you, not your customers. But Northwest Natural's response is, well, we're going to run to the PUC and get them to allow us to pass it on to our customers. So how does the Public Utility Commission come into play in the scenarios of these kinds of risk bonds?
Well, it's a great question. And so one of the important steps in the phase one resolution is a gap analysis, which looks at what level of this risk is somehow covered by other agencies and other processes and all that, and then what's left behind that we have to regulate through additional mechanisms. So I'm not an expert in the POC and its jurisdictions and its proceedings, but all I can say is that that is one of the goals of the gap analysis, is to make sure that we're not doubling up or, you know, being redundant, that we're not adding on any other obligations that are already well covered. And so that's why this risk assessment is so important to start with.
Well, you had said in the presentation, the goal was to impose the fee on the distributors, on the producers, and to not pass it on to the customers.
Oh, correct. Yeah.
And so that's what I was asking about. So I'll be curious how the city of Portland and Multnomah County's process moves forward with that potential challenge. And then my second question is, you know, we have oil trains that come through the city and park, you know, not that far from where I live. And you had a horrifying photo there in your presentation of the oil trains that exploded. So would this be potentially a mechanism for either addressing that risk or reducing the favorable environment in which those trains come through our community, so it reduces them doing that? I don't know if we could put pressure on in that through this means, but I'm just curious how these might apply to that particular situation.
Yes, absolutely. I was waiting for an oil train question, so you got it. And yes, it's one of the express goals of this program is to include that as one of the infrastructure elements regulated. But that being said, there's enormous legal issues that have to be dealt with that deal with the Interstate Commerce Clause, and you know, so we are working on that. We have attorneys working on that. And one way we've investigating is a way to impose these financial assurance requirements through your all's influence on property taxes, right? So like the railroad owns, you know, or leases a certain, you know, along its line, you control the property taxes on that. So, you know, so we're looking at options like that, which don't involve imposing a fee or something on rail cars or the liquids in the rail cars, which could be challenged under the Interstate Commerce Clause. Great question, but it's the intent of the program to actually go after that risk, at least get to the phase of forcing these companies to figure out what a catastrophic risk scenario looks like. I mean, you have the right to know what happens if there's a major oil train derailment in a really sensitive part of Lane County, right? So this would be part of that phase one process.
Yeah, thank you very much. And in case you're not aware, Councilor Groves was the longtime fire chief for the city of Eugene. So I think he's also aware of that danger. So thank you. I really appreciate the responses and the presentation.
Can I just add to that, John? Is that okay?
I think we've got two.
Okay.
Should we do questions first and then? Or?
Yeah.
Councilor Gross, do you want to ask your question?
Thank you. Actually, I wanted, you know, as much for my colleagues as anything, like Daphne raised about Portland with the fuel storage, bulk fuel storage. We have that in the Eugene area as well, out Prairie Road, and it's Kinder Morgan that operates bulk fuel storage that's piped by pipeline down from Portland. But that sits on basically river loam, which has a liquefaction factor that's very dangerous in a seismic event. So that's a hot spot that I know we spend a lot of time target hazarding as a target hazard, developing as a target hazard. But I wanted to actually get to the oil trains, and thank you, Councilor Syrat. That was something I was thinking about as well. I know back in the day we actually held a summit here with our two senators and Representative DeFazio to talk about that. And we had representatives from National DOT and Rail Safety. And I partnered at the time with Aaron Janssens, the Portland Fire Chief. And we worked very hard to try to make as safe as we could, knowing that, you know, we couldn't stop the shipments. We did get the speed reduced, But Councilor Syrette's correct. We have oil trains coming right through the heart of Eugene and through the heart of Springfield every day. And our local fire department has a regional hazardous materials team that basically protects from just south of Salem all the way up and over the Willamette Pass. So this is these trains are also going not only down the Columbia Gorge, but up through the headwaters of the Willamette River. So we have some very sensitive environmental area that I've always been concerned about, who's going to be responsible for this when an accident happens. And that's something that I do think we need to, well, there's so many big issues right now, but that's yet another one that somehow needs to be in our planning and resiliency planning, and figuring out how the cost of not only protecting and responding, but recovery, how that is managed. The last thing I wanted to say too was there are a lot of the rail cars, the tank cars, almost all of them are privately owned. The railroads don't own those. They're just transporting them. And there's right now, most of the crude oil is going in what's called a DOT 111 car, which is very substandard, thin walls. There's no rollover protection. There's all kinds of penetration problems. And trying to get those upgraded to what's called a DOT 117, it's very expensive, and industry has been extremely slow to move in that direction. So that was the last thing I wanted to point out. Thank you.
Louisa, and then Art, you had your hand up before.
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much, Councilor. Surratt also started down the same questions I had, which is, you had mentioned that there was a trend for fossil fuel transactions that happen in the city. And so what happens with places that there's not a transaction, there's a movement. So going from A to B, we're in the middle. And then so that was sort of addressed, I think. And so the other question was the scale. So fossil fuels are broken down and broken down and broken down. So in other conversations that you've heard, would somebody who's thinking to the extreme, a barbecue propane tank is a fossil fuel transaction to some degree. So at some level, right, there's a cutoff point. Gas stations are moving fossil fuels. The gas station owner isn't Chevron themselves, they're a franchise or something. And so how have other conversations around that scale come about, and what have people determined?
Yeah, well, I mean, the general idea is it's on the wholesalers and the major, everything before the consumer, right? So, but there's a lot of interesting twists, and that would be part of the design of the program. But like, for instance, I think these monster SUV Ford 850 pickup trucks that they sell at the dealers, those are significant pieces of fossil fuel infrastructure, right? And so I think the dealers should be responsible for like putting that much like fossil fuel consuming infrastructure on the road. But that's my personal preference. But these are the part of the design issues that you guys would get into if you go down this road, is what level to regulate on. But I think we're looking after the major flows, but everything before the retail.
And just to jump in,
yeah, definitely a point on that.
Yeah, two things. One is, in the case of Portland and Multnomah County, we decided just to focus on the major oil and gas fossil fuel terminals themselves over a certain size as a place to start. In King County, however, they've decided to expand the review to include the oil and gas, the gas networks that snake their way through communities, because they actually don't have these large terminals in King County, but they do have a lot of gas infrastructure that they're equally concerned about in terms of a seismic event as well as a climate event. So there's what I find exciting about this work is that depending on the initiative of the jurisdiction, you can take it and expand it in a new way. And I'm reminded of the fact that in Spokane, they were very concerned with how they could impose some sort of fee on the rail traffic coming through town, because it went right next to a hospital and right into downtown. And that was shot down. I forget the name of the city councilor who tried to impose that. But I think we need to revisit this because this is a concern for large and small jurisdictions alike, whether it's Seattle or Portland. And I think everybody's afraid of being sued by the fossil fuel industry if they start to take this on. It's one reason why we're trying to get federal legislation underway, and we do have some really exciting prospects there. But if we can somehow think through an innovative strategy, and John has some ideas about how we can tackle the oil trains issue, and do it collectively and do it simultaneously, for example, in Washington, Oregon, and California, I can tell you that we have folks in LA that would love to partner with people in Seattle and in Spokane so that we could share the risk of the legal challenges. And John hasn't mentioned our listserv, but we do have a listserv where we're just beginning to share strategies with folks. So I encourage you to get in touch with us so that we can begin to collaborate across jurisdictions.
I don't know if Art still had his hand up, and then Zach, and probably should do a time check. I'm not.
Yeah.
A quick question. As a commission, we're charged with giving some advice to council and suggesting some actions on their part. So even though I know you've talked about it so far, if we were putting forth a recommendation to the city council, what are some of the initial steps that would need to be taken, and your estimate of the time involved in that, to do a reasonable job with that over, say, a year to get somewhere on this process?
Well, thanks, Art, for that. Yeah, so it's like we said, we already have boilerplate resolutions for jumpstarting this phase 1 that have been passed in Multnomah County, King County, City of Portland, that can be passed on to council there. Hey, can you do something, draft something similar to Eugene? And then once that passes, and so we passed it at the city council level in Eugene, in Portland, and commission level in Multnomah County, we set a deadline of a year to come back to finish the risk assessment and get everything that's needed to then go into phase 2, which is actually the regulatory phase. So 1 year is a pretty short time frame, turnaround time, but I think it can be done. It doesn't have to be extremely expensive or time consuming. I mean, a lot of jurisdictions, when it comes to a lot of different kinds of fees and taxes, they're not based on some PhD's work, or you know what I mean? They're not based on like this gigantic record. They're based on just reasonable information that provides a reasonable basis for the assurance amount or the surcharge. So getting that done should not be a real heavy lift. And so I think about a year to get that risk assessment done, and then another year to go through the regulatory process. And so, yeah.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, so a year to do the risk assessment, understand what our risks are, where they are, and somehow evaluate the cost of those risks and what insurance and things we have, or the kind of thing we would be proposing in a way to get done in a year or two. Sure. And what's your sense, given, I mean, Portland obviously has a lot more work to do than us, but any sense of hours or women hours to do that kind of thing?
Well, it's a great question, because we worked with Portland State University to kind of price out what it would involve for Multnomah County and Portland, and it was no small ticket on it. It's like $500,000 to really understand the risks here and model out catastrophic things. But that's $500,000 spent to avoid a multi-billion-dollar expenditure down the road. But there are ways we've, to streamline that whole analysis and scale it down. So obviously Eugene is a step down in terms of the needs of the analysis than Portland, but that was a decent ballpark, I think.
But as we develop the analysis, we can also share it, and it's probably going to be somewhat less expensive as Portland and Multnomah County begins to develop their own analysis, and same with King County. Hopefully we can make it more affordable for other jurisdictions.
Yeah, but I don't know if you caught that last thing on one of my slides, is I believe there's several pots of federal funding that the county or the city can apply to. They're in the realm of risk management, disaster risk mitigation, climate change now with the new Biden-Harris administration. So what I would suggest is that you investigate those grant sources for risk preparedness. There's all sorts of money out there for doing that, and go to that for the funding rather than try to do it, all on your own.
Just two quick comments, and I know there's somebody waiting to talk. One of which is, this is the beginning of the just transition that we know we need to have, right? I mean, we know we need to move away from fossil fuels. Why not do it before we have a major catastrophe and before we have the cost foisted onto the public sector? So that's point number one. Point number two, I just wanted to respond to Randy. First of all, deeply grateful for your service as a firefighter. My son, I have been rescued by firefighters. One of the things that we have come to realize in the city of Portland is that there is actually no, there's no, what did they call it? A fire station in ground zero of the fossil fuel infrastructure. So one of the demands that we're making right now, because by the time this stuff goes, it'll be uninhabitable. It'll be, the roads will be down. The firefighters have basically told us there's nothing they could do. They would just have to stand back and watch this horrible catastrophe unfold. So I don't know if it's a similar situation there in Eugene, but there are ways of making demands as part of, from civil society to make sure that we actually not only have these bonds in place, but have the human capacity and the firefighter capacity in place to deal with a major disaster.
Just real quick, we do not have fire stations at ground zero, but from a deployment standpoint, I always preferred to be just outside of ground zero so that the asset is still operable and can roll in. So that's, you have to kind of take that into consideration as well.
No, we were scheduled till 6:45, so I think we have a little under 20 minutes left. So if anybody else has questions, I think we have plenty of time for 5 more plus. My question is, can you just go into a little bit more detail about what some of the major risks here in Eugene are, and what the scale of the costs would be if we don't do anything and we're not prepared in terms of millions, billions? What are the scale of the potential dangers and costs we would face?
Well, I mean, that is what the phase 1 risk assessment is supposed to answer those questions. So, I mean, I can't answer those now, but what I've been ballparking things is, so Oregon has a climate risk assessment. It's updated fairly regularly every couple of years. And you could look at that and kind of downscale it to, your region to figure out what some of those climate damages would be. Then it's a matter of kind of costing those out. And so that's how we're suggesting to the jurisdictions that have gone down this phase 1 road is don't reinvent the wheel. Just base your assessment and your risk assessment, your cost assessment on what's already there. And there are these great statewide climate damage assessments, predictions that are already out there. And so I encourage you to kind of look at those models and look at the conclusions of those reports and kind of crosswalk them to the unique situation in Lane County.
I would also add that there's a brilliant expert who works at the county level in Clackamas County, and I'm forgetting his name right now, but he focuses on disaster management and response for Clackamas County. He used to work under President Obama and has pointed out that among other costs associated with fossil fuel infrastructure in the Multnomah County situation, it would of course destroy the entire fossil fuel infrastructure for the entire state. And then because of the leaks and the spill that would go downriver in the Willamette and into the Columbia, it would shut down all of the shipping industry. It would destroy the tourism and the fishing industry. So we need to be thinking about not just the risks to the local community, but if your fossil fuel infrastructure is situated on the banks of a major river, what are the implications for everybody downstream and for all of the species downstream, for all of the people who live downstream?
Haley is next, and then Louisa.
Yeah, thank you, Daphne. And that kind of leads me into my question. I'm just wondering, how do you all ensure that the risk assessment of, say, a city or a county is done in an equitable manner? So actually distributing those costs among different communities.
That's a great question. So we have been recommending, and I think, yeah, I think Multnomah County agreed with this, that the risk assessment should be able to be refined to the neighborhood level, so that we could, use it to figure out how these risks play out with respect to low-income communities and BPOC communities, and where we have that demographic data. So it's really important to have it fine-tuned at that level. Like in North Portland, for instance, our most diverse communities, and that's also where the big rail lines and the fossil fuel facilities are. So they're disproportionately going to be affected by disasters associated with this infrastructure. So it's a really good question. So I think it's important to have it at least at the neighborhood level.
But just to addendum to that, John, we were pushing for the health impacts associated with those communities, and the city and the county decided that they didn't have the funding to focus on that in phase 1. That's phase 2. Right now, they're just focused on the risk to the public sector, because I think they were only able to raise about $100,000 to do that study, and that was sufficient. I mean, that was not sufficient to do a much more granular look at the health risks and population risks to people near the infrastructure.
Yeah, I guess I was just, as we've been hearing this, and I would love to hear from the city and county staff who are on the call, how much of the work, baseline work, do you feel like has been done in the CRO, regulatory or the climate action planning that would provide underpinning for some of this?
Yeah, I can jump in and say, I don't think we've done much of the work. I don't know all the details. This isn't my area of expertise by any means, but I think we would need to kind of go back to basics and really understand what's going on here.
Jim?
Thank you. I just wanted to thank the city staff and Fossil Fuel Risk Bond Subcommittee and the Sustainability Commission for providing this presentation tonight. 350 Eugene's been pushing to have this be heard for a number of years, and we really feel it's a great tool for reducing our carbon footprint eventually and holding the fossil fuel industry. So thank you very much. And also thank you to Councilor Surratt and Councilor Groves, both asked my questions, but I did have thing about, I would think that regarding business licensing would give you a lot of the first phase information. It should tell you the inventory of like how much is at the tank farm, or how much Union or what's the Georgia Pacific uses in their adhesive thing, their facility out there on Irving Road. There's a lot of facilities here that hold and distribute and use a lot of fossil fuel products, and they use LP gas tank cars that come into it. So that would be, I mean, all this information should be part of when they apply for a business license, and the updates of those business licenses, that information should be there. When we were doing some work on this with the Risk Bond Subcommittee, talked to a senior analyst or got information from a senior analyst, and claims that they said the city requires a bond of any vendor contract that meets or exceeds $100,000. The city's standard insurance requirement for contracts is $2 million per occurrence and $3 million aggregate. So my question is, would that be satisfactory to handle some sort of an event or a disaster?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, it goes to, that gap analysis of what's covered and what isn't during the risk assessment. And the other thing is, when I touched on what should be in the risk assessment phase 1 resolution, and we put this in the federal bill that's being worked on, are disclosure requirements, right? So exactly what Jim was saying is that we need these companies. I mean, first of all, figure out who owns this infrastructure, where are they, how do I contact them? Then there should be disclosure requirements, and those disclosure requirements don't necessarily have to be public information, right? Because there's going to be issues over confidentiality and blah, 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 protected. They only really need to be seen by the city, the county, whoever's doing the regulation to determine the financial assurance amount. So they can't argue confidential information or proprietary information. But it's a really important step, I think, in that first resolution, is to just pass that disclosure requirement, so that with that scenario that Jim just described, we can be in a position to determine, is that adequate coverage or not.
Councilor Surratt, and then Councilor Groves, and then I'm calling myself.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, this might be getting a little bit down in the weeds, but the list of businesses that we require licenses of is pretty small. So I don't know if they're covered by that, but they might have to have some kind of permit. And if they do have a requirement to carry a certain amount of insurance, then it seems like they have to provide some of that data to the city already. So to validate their level of coverage, I guess. So I mean, I guess there are ways we can get at that, but maybe the most direct path is what John just said, is to include a disclosure requirement as part of our action.
Laura, am I up? Oh, this question, I guess, is back to Jim. Jim, are you, when you're talking about the tax on volume of, a hydrocarbon, for example, let's go back to Kinder Morgan. Are you talking about an annual volume, or are you talking about capacity of the site?
I would say capacity. I would say both. Capacity of the site. I mean, how much is full at one time, and then also how much volume are they pushing through the thing. I'm thinking of all the 1075 LP tank cars that are coming through here. I mean, you see a lot currently, you're seeing a lot more of those than you are crude oil currently, just because of the COVID effect. But there's a lot of industry around here that uses that liquid petroleum gas as a catalyst in doing their businesses. Right. So does that get factored into what they're holding on site, is one of my questions. And where do you draw a line on all that stuff?
Sure, and that's a very good question. I think the methodology would need to have some real thought processes behind it before we go forward, because for example, volume fluctuates constantly. It doesn't stay full and never goes all the way empty, but it's within that range constantly, just like our water reservoirs. They're not always kept full either. There's, for turbidity reasons, they're constantly going up and down. And you hope when a power outage happens, at least you're in the up cycle. But those are all very, very important things to talk about and think about. And for those of you that don't know how those tank farms work, they actually have floating tops. So the top goes down with the fuel, and water that gets in there drains off. And that way you keep vapor, because it's the fuel itself isn't the problem. It's the vapor that produces off of it. It produces a flammable vapor, and that's what it burns, and it just burns the level down. And another thing, all these tank farms, they do have containment dikes built around them. That's part of code. The problem is when the fire department comes in and tries to put what's called AFFF, aqueous film forming foam, on top, it increases the volume, and then you have to worry about overflow. So that's a problem there as well. And then the last thing I wanted to say, I think in our case, I believe Kinder Morgan is just outside the city.
Yeah, that may be. They do have the 8-inch line that comes down through and catches a part of the actual city property. But yeah, I would think maybe that's something that needs to be looked at, is the business licenses for a disclosure from all these places that they let you know how much volume of whatever methyl ethyl bad stuff they have, you know?
Right. And there's the city and the state have different ways of collecting some of that data. The city has its Toxics Right to Know program, but that's more about use and capture. But and that's run out of the fire department as well. But it seems like we have some of the tools there, but I think it's going to be really important before we embark on this that we really have a game plan that's laid out so we know what to ask and what to go after. And seeing some models that are already out there, I think would be very useful. Thank you.
I just wanted to add just a bit about Kinder Morgan, the tank farm. When we were doing our research in the committee, I just asked them, like, you know, what insurance coverage do you have? And they basically said they wouldn't tell me, but they would tell someone from the city. And I researched, like, who does anyone have to know? And like, nobody has to know. So unless someone from the city asks them, which they said they would tell, nobody knows what insurance coverage they currently have. And if we don't have any other questions, we have just a few more minutes. John or Daphne, do you want to add any closing thoughts?
No, except really, this was a really engaging discussion. You hit on all the dimensions that need to be talked through. And so we're really excited to work with you if you choose to go forward. So thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us, and really thanks so much to 350 Eugene for pushing for this. I did put in the chat this guy Jay Wilson, who I strongly encourage those of you who are concerned about seismic events and fossil fuel infrastructure. Very knowledgeable. He did a really good interview on Locust Focus, which is a radio show that gets out in the Pacific Northwest. But I mean, really what we're doing is we're learning by doing. And the more jurisdictions that take this up, I think the more we're going to be sharing knowledge. And I have encouraged people, if you want to join our listserv, you can email me at daphne@sustainable-economy.org, and we'll make sure that we can share the information from other jurisdictions. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, just confirming this is going to be, there's a tape of this somewhere. I missed the first 5 minutes. I apologize for another event I was involved in, but I can go back and pick that up somewhere.
Yes, so the recording for this meeting will be on the commission's website tomorrow morning. We also do post these through staff to the YouTube channel, the Public Meetings YouTube channel. So that should be uploaded within the next week or so.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just want to say thank you so much to our speakers and to our local staff and counselors that joined us today. We have a short 5-minute break before coming back with all of our commission business, which we will start out with the Outreach Committee's proposal. So we'll see everybody at 10 till at 6:50. And thanks again for joining us tonight. Everybody that joined us. Thanks.
Mike, what was that? A tricolored heron or something?
I'm sorry, what? Oh, the bird?
Yeah.
You know, I got to go back and look at it. I don't really remember. I'm sorry. It's I have a collection of them, but I think it's a heron, but I'd have to look exactly as to which one it is.
Definitely. Were you in Florida?
I didn't hear you.
Is that from Florida? What do you think?
No.
I wondered
Yeah,
if it was from Florida or.
it's definitely not Eugene.
6:50, if folks can start coming back, and then if the outreach committee wants to take us away.
Sure, I can jump in. So it's good to see everybody. Laura and Louisa and I have been hard at work on the documentation that is in your agenda packet. I can try and pull it up right now really quick. The big...
Samantha, sorry to cut in. Samantha, can you bring up that document and just go from one to the other? We don't have to have every single presenter figure out the screen share.
Sure. Hold on one second.
Yeah, that's okay. Thank you. I'll just give the quick overview then really quick. We had the cover sheet or the cover memo in there that kind of explains what's going on, but essentially, as all of you probably remember, we had the budget committee allocate funding for the first annual, at least for saying first annual for now, allocation for what I have just in my head been calling the Community Green Fund, but we can obviously come up with something else if people feel strongly. But essentially this pot of seed funding has been allocated to us as we've discussed. And so what Laura and Louisa and I have been working on is essentially the scaffolding or the structure that would go into not only kind of like housing this content online, but then also enabling, again, a structure for us to actually be able to begin disseminating these funds. And so hopefully everyone has had a chance to look through this documentation, but we were bringing forward all of this to you tonight with the hopes that we would have your approval on what is the draft or mock-up webpage content, as well as the guidelines, which is just an adaptation of the HRC version of their guidelines. And then finally, the online request support form, which is like currently a mock-up. But we put all three of these files together, again, with the idea that this is kind of the infrastructure that is then enabling people to begin applying and for us to begin reviewing applications. So yeah, the big picture, those are kind of the three pieces we're looking at tonight. And if people are open or accepting of that and want to vote in favor, that would enable us to begin putting this stuff online. Laura and I had discussed the idea of putting together almost like PR slides that then we would be taking to the organizations that we already attend, whether that's the NAACP, 350, Sunrise, any of those organizations, and kind of letting people know the funding is available. And then from there, we would hopefully begin receiving applications that then the commission would review. So that's kind of the big picture, but I'll open it up to Laura and Louisa if there's anything else about just like process and voting or background that any of you want to add, because you worked very hard on it too.
I can just add that we, it's all like Kelsey said, it's all modeled after HRC, and Kelsey talked to Julia, and before, when we worked on this before, Julia was in the group and she had a lot of experience using it and said that it took up very little time. It was really easy and a great way to bring the community into the meetings, to have people come and present their ideas, and also a great way to connect with outside groups doing work that's in line. And we also talked about keeping it really open, especially the first time. So we wanted to just make it as we just kept it very open. So if they can make a case that this is connected to sustainability with our meeting our mission, then we will. Then it's eligible.
I'm happy to jump into from a staff perspective, but I want to leave space for Louisa if she's got anything she wants to add.
Nope, I think that pretty much covered. There's 3 levels, as with the Human Rights Commission, and one that actually doesn't request any money. It's just a sort of an endorsement. And so that was an interesting addition that we hadn't really thought about before, but that the higher level of support would actually require or expect some sort of engagement or participation connection to a commissioner, at least one commissioner, which is similar to what the Human Rights Commission. So we are ourselves signing up for participating in these events, and again, very loosely defining what is an event, especially during COVID, but want to be able to hand out funds. So we did try to clarify a little language where we could, and then leave it very vague on purpose, hoping that it encouraged people to be creative.
Awesome. Yeah, I just wanted to add that ahead of this meeting, Kelsey and I were emailing about this particular packet, and I did reach out to HRC staff, which is Fabio Andrade, to ask what their process looks like, so that once, if you were to approve this recommendation, we could move forward with that on our end. Because my understanding would be that there would be some staff involvement just because we're handling money and all of that. So I wanted to give you an update that I had spoken, or at least sent off that request for more information, and looking towards other staff in our organization who help with our web presence and our web analytics to help us get set up on that end as well. So I just wanted to let you all know that that was in progress, just to see what that would look like. And I'm happy to answer questions if you have any about that.
Thanks, I appreciate you looking into that.
Councilor Semple?
Thanks. I just want to say that I was on the Human Rights Commission for 4 years using this, and it was really easy, and it felt fair, and it felt like we got the information we needed to make small and larger requests and endorse things and try to have commissioners attend them. So I endorse the process and this setup because I've used it and it works.
Yeah, I just want to say everything looks really good when I looked at it earlier, and just thank you for putting this together. And I look forward to the commission being able to give out money in the future. Are there any other questions or comments before we move to approve? Seeing none, does somebody want to make a motion if we actually need a motion?
Move to approve.
Right. And a second?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor, please raise your hand. Though I realize I can't actually see everybody. Can you see everybody out there? I see.
Do it, participants, and we can raise our virtual hands or something.
Turn off screen sharing.
Okay. Okay, can you turn off screen share for a second? Samantha?
Yeah, there's also gallery view. So if you use that, you can scroll through and see people.
Okay. All right, looks like everybody raised their hand. Any no's? Okay, and any abstentions? Okay. All right, and
sorry, Zach, just a moment. I see a few people that still have their hands up during the opposed and abstention. For folks, was there anyone who was opposing or abstaining?
They had both had theirs up at the beginning, I think.
I just want to make sure. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Okay, next up is that passes. So thank you. Next up is the Food Security Committee.
Great. I thought it was exciting. Can you hear me? I thought it was exciting to see so many proposals for committees. I thought I'd get a committee proposal out there so we had something to do, but we have a lot of them. Anyway, obviously moving forward, resiliency, food security is a big part of any consideration for the community. And but it still does relate back to the greenhouse gases. As you know, agriculture is a major source of greenhouse gas emissions. So the more food that we can grow locally, the more and an organic or a regenerative fashion, the better it would be. And Eugene really isn't an island. I just keep seeing Eugene as part of the Southern Willamette Valley, and we have, you know, sustainability for this region here. Obviously, the farming will be a major part of that, and even with climate change, I imagine that we have a great opportunity to have a lot of food grown locally. And I also see trying to understand what's going on with the local production of food, which I know not much about, but I think that this, if we could find something that the city can do, that's kind of the challenge here. Is there something that the city of Eugene can do? I mean, we've put up a new farmers market, which is an excellent step in reaching out to those groups. So finding out who the groups are, contacting them, and reaching out, it's a way where, as an urban community, we can try to, again, interact with our rural friends and compatriots in dealing with sustainability issues. So I was really seeing probably 3 meetings, I suppose. I kind of had down 2, but probably 3, maybe 1 at the end of this month, end of May, and then maybe trying to get something done for the June meeting. And I think what we'd be trying to do would be to just understand the situation, interview some organizations that are dealing with this, and maybe not completing a proposal to council yet, but at least finding out if there are some avenues that we could maybe explore. Might have to be in the fall, since we don't have a lot of time left. So,
Councilor Semple?
Thank you. I love this idea. One of the things we need besides saving our climate is jobs. And so food is one of the big manufacturers businesses in Lane County that we promote in a lot of ways. And I would love to see us promote it even more, both for food security, also seed banking and seed genetics that we could share with the rest of the world. So I would love to hear this information, and I'd appreciate it if someone got it. So I say yay.
And Tina?
I really like this idea too. I was curious if the organizations that you're going to reach out to are going to be recommending certain sites or certain neighborhoods, or are you guys going to be researching as a committee and figuring out which neighborhoods would need it or would most benefit from it?
It's a good question. I'm, you know, that's something that we can throw into the mix. I was really seeing us probably reaching out almost more to the local Lane County organizations. There's various farming organizations, organic farming organizations, and producers, seed people to do that. I'm not sure then how we map that back into city communities, but that's something to be thinking about as well. I guess the other side of it is what food is needed, who's needing the food, who doesn't have food security and who does at this point. And then where can it come from would be, I was thinking more at this point of looking the other direction. Where can it come from, and how can we help those people to create more and more diverse opportunities? But interesting point you bring up. So that can be part, we can at least think about that and begin to address it. Thank you.
Well, just on my own behalf, I think just recognizing that there are a lot of really great organizations working in this space locally. Largely, I just look forward to learning a lot more about them and what they're already doing and what we can do to support a lot of those local efforts that others are already doing. So I'm in support, and I guess, are there any other questions or comments before we move towards a motion? Seeing none, do we have a first and a second?
I clearly move it.
I'll second.
Laura barely got that one on the second. So let's see. Samantha, can you close the share screen so we can see everybody again? Okay. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, and all opposed?
And
M team, I think your hand's still up. Okay, and then any abstentions? Okay, so I had everybody in favor except for Karen, who looks like she stepped away for a moment.
And Doug, you're with us, right?
So it passes.
That's right. I'm looking forward to being on the committee.
Excellent. Doug's our expert already. So
Right, and I'll join you as well. Was there anybody else that was interested in volunteering on this committee? Okay, well, when it gets scheduled, it'll get sent around if anybody else would like to join. Okay, next up is the Urban Canopy Committee. Mike, do you want to talk through that one?
Yeah, do you have the proposal that I put up?
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Before I start, I want to just, thank everybody that, let me sit in on your committees, kind of the new guy in town. And, I had a lot of really dumb questions and really appreciate your patience with me kind of learning the protocol. And I'm impressed with all of you. I'm impressed with everything that I've heard, and it's just, it's fine to keep this company. So, jumping into this, this is something that has been my personal passion for many years. I'll talk a little bit about my experience with a few of these programs a little bit later, but what motivated me to put this up here was actually the urban forestry presentation to City Council, and I listened really carefully in some of the things they said, and the message I got from them that came right off the bat was it's sort of now or never, and if we we have, in case anybody didn't see it or might not remember, but their main crux of their presentation was that we're losing, Eugene is losing 1% of their canopy a year, and that is going the wrong way. We had hoped for a 30% coverage, and we're losing, I think it was 32 Hayward fields of canopy a year. So that's sort of was my my little kick to go, okay, well, let's see what we can do to change this. The reason I set it up this way is that I don't think there's one particular answer to this, and it's kind of like a lot of these sustainability puzzles that we have. I think it's got to be addressed from different ways. There is community planning going on. I'm actually involved with the Friends of Trees here in Eugene, and they did planting last weekend, and they're are working with the city, but the challenge right now is not necessarily on the city property. It's on private property, because 75% of our canopy isn't on the city land. It's private. So one of the planting programs that I think that maybe are missing the mark, but would be interesting to sort of talk about, at least, is some sort of a planting where you've got this picture of street, and you've got the public right of way, which is 4 feet wide. That's basically city. This giant lawn that's in front of the house has got no trees, and it's 10 times the space as that little strip is unaddressed because it's private, and so that was one of the programs that I thought would be interesting to explore. The other one, the next one is the Heritage Tree Program, which is truly been part of my life's work. I have only been in Eugene for 3 years. I came from Hawaii, and I was president of the Outdoor Circle there, which is the largest environmental group in the state. And one of the programs that that I poured my heart and soul into is their exceptional tree program, which is the same as the Heritage Tree Program that we would look at here. The idea is our canopy is, and this is something I would look for urban forestry to give me a little better information, but our canopy is made up of 20 to 30% of it are old mature trees that are going to die, and they're going to die in the next 5 or 7 years. The idea of this program is to provide some sort of assistance or some sort of a way to preserve that those heritage trees, the ones that are actually doing all the work. And if you think about it, if you can extend, a lot of times it's a monetary issue, you know, it's on private property, and it's a monetary decision to get rid of the tree. Something happened, a branch fell or something, and it's just cheaper to take it down. And it's a homeowner, property owner doing that. If we could figure out a way to preserve those for, you know, just on average, another 5 years, our canopy grows quite a bit, or stays, you know, it doesn't take the big hit of losing it, but also it's really worth looking at as far as that goes. There's a lot more heritage trees that I won't bore you with, but essentially it honors the biggest, the rarest, the most unusual trees. But generally, for the purposes of this this program, it would be basically the ones that are doing the work with all the canopy that they provide, also the storm drainage. You know, they're doing most of the work. So it's sort of you know, concentrates on that. And again, that's, you know, that's something I know very much about. We were successfully passed a state law that got the homeowners assistance if they needed it, if they want to apply for it. And we saved a ton of trees doing that, you know, that way. Trees for Concrete is just essentially, a while back in Eugene, if you go into the history, there was a movement to remove trees and put in concrete, some sort of maintenance decision. And essentially, this is just a reversal of that. It's just basically taking out that concrete. It's old and ugly and cracked right now, and putting trees in. It's just, and this is, again, it's an existing program that I know of. It's just dormant and not being used. So there is a model. It's not, doesn't take I think a ton of decision, but it's or at least discussion, but it's another small thing we can do to keep the canopy going. And the other component is trees in schools, which, if you think about a school, it's a lot of property. There's a lot of trees, a lot of the campuses that are let's just say sparsely treed. But this program, it involves getting the children involved in why we're doing it. So it has the educational component, as well as a component that basically starts the next generation of us sustainability people at a very young age, understanding why we're doing it. And there is an educational program in place that that I know of that would very well be incorporated on this. I put 12 meetings down. I don't know how, you know, it really depends on who wants to join me, because right now I'm on an island. I don't have any friends. So anybody in the committee, in this commission, that, you know, that wants to roll up their sleeves and go to work on this, you know, I would just appreciate people that that, you know, are minded that way. And I know we all are in some sense, but we all have our things. You know, trees are a specialty, and they happen to be mine. But I'm, you know, would love somebody that kind of had a heart involved. But other than that, I think you'd all be fine. So if I could get some help, if this should get approved, I would truly appreciate it. There's also some. Am I done? Am I talking too much, Zach? Okay.
Sorry, but if there are any questions or comments, we should get to those pretty soon.
Okay. Yeah, that's basically all I got.
Louisa?
Yeah, sure. I appreciate that, Mike. I've been having the same conversations for several years in the neighborhood of River Road and Santa Clara, where we have canopy, but we're also actively encouraging infill to meet our transportation and our community housing needs. And so we're struggling with the same questions of how to protect the canopy on private property. So I'd be interested to support the work, especially because there's so many interesting overlaps with wetland protection in the area in our city, where we have a lot of private property, which is nonetheless protected property by its wetland designation. And so there's opportunities to educate homeowners there and then celebrate those trees that are doing those major ecosystem service work for us by absorbing stormwater in neighborhoods that don't have curb and gutter. And so really taking that and holding those trees up. And they might not be the rarest or the oldest trees, but if they're mature and they're stable and they're in someone's backyard, it would be cool to map them, to know about them, and to support those trees in the long term, and then plant more in those wetland spaces to kind of augment that. So I'm up for helping.
Awesome. And just one comment about your area that you live in, a ton of mature trees, which is great, but you got to think they also have a life. So, and they were all sort of planted, in the same era. So, you got to think about tomorrow. And the infill is huge in areas like that, because when those big ones go, there are all of a sudden a big old hole. So I've been particularly impressed by listening to you, and I'm very complimented that you would want to join me. So thank you.
Councilor Semple.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing this forward. When I first read it, I was concerned because I don't want commissioners to duplicate work that staff's already doing. And, we're starting to work on our forestry plan. And since you heard the presentation, that city is aware of it and working on it. So I hadn't made the connection to private land. So I think this is a really essential project once I got my head in the right direction. So thank you. I hope it gets going. Trees are the reason I moved to Oregon. So go trees.
Awesome.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Seeing none, does somebody want to make a motion?
I'll move to approve the committee.
And a second?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor, please raise your hand. Looked like everybody raised their hand. Next up, any no's? And any abstentions? Okay, all right, and it passes. Who is all interested in working on that? Sounded like Louisa and Mike. Anybody else want to volunteer? Okay, I can probably hang out for that if you need me, Mike. Can you pull up the next set of proposals, please, Samantha? The waste oversight and the sustainability funding letter. Oh, Karen, did you still have your hand up? Did you want to say something?
Yeah, wait a minute. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I had to step away a second because my dog's been driving me crazy, but did Art get some volunteers for his committee on the food resiliency?
Yeah, we're good. But if you can make the first meeting, I'll get something maybe going.
Okay.
First week next month, and then I know you're taking off, but that's fine.
That would be great. Count me in. And I appreciate the other committee recommendation as well. Good job, Mike. Thank you.
So I wrote these two proposals, so I'll actually ask Mtima to run the Q&A portion. But to start off with, the first one of these is basically citizen involvement in waste management. Something that just has concerned me in the years that I've been on the commission is that there's a couple of occasions have happened where the city's waste management rules have changed without the Sustainability Commission really even knowing that potential rule changes were being proposed. And so the idea of this committee is really just to learn what are the citizen engagement processes that happen when rule changes happen to the city's waste management plan, and what potential additional citizen involvement should there be. So this could potentially be, a greater role for the commission or for some other body to basically have greater citizen involvement and oversight in our waste management plan. So the first step is just to learn about what processes already exist, and then to think about what would maybe a more ideal situation be if good processes are not in place to include citizen involvement. I'd love to hear any questions or concerns or comments.
Karen?
I think this is really good, and it just seems like it's providing a nudge to be included in the process. And I feel like this also kind of ties in with this whole thing about us meeting with the council more regularly and getting some direct feedback on stuff. So I don't think this is a big lift, and I volunteer to help out.
Any other questions or comments?
I guess I just wanted to ask that, could you give me an example of kind of what you're, like, when this has happened that you're thinking about that triggered this?
The two times that have come to mind, the big one was basically after China said, we're not going to take your quote unquote recyclables that had a bunch of waste in it. Essentially, I think the whole West Coast was trying to figure out how to respond to that. And the city of Eugene decided that to essentially no longer take a number of types of plastics in our mixed use waste bin. And that might have been justified, but it would have been nice to hear that the change was going to happen before it happened rather than after. There was also something around basically making it so that you had to stop people from digging through your trash. I'm not as aware of the particulars on that one, but it was a more recent rule change that I think some people were concerned that it was largely, trying to get people to stop people from taking recyclables out of their recycle bin. Those are the two instances. The first one was the big one.
So I'm assuming you'd have to involve the waste haulers themselves, because in your first example, I'd be curious if that was a city ordinance or in fact a decision made by Sanapac and Royal Refuse and the others.
My understanding is that the rule change was lobbied for, and that city staff made the decision to no longer require those things to be allowed in the blue bin.
Okay.
Karen?
Another one that came recently, which was kind of disturbing, was all of a sudden we saw some emails from the solid waste department in the city about creating an ordinance and mandating that all garbage had to be bagged. And there's some really fundamental problems with that. And maybe Emily can speak to that, because I don't know what happened with that recently, but it was something that all of a sudden they had been working on for.
As far as I know, nothing has happened with it. It's sort of, been put aside. I can ask, but I don't think anything's been decided about it. And it was, I think it was another one of those ordinances that were going to be changed to be in alignment with the state, but I'll look into it.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think, if this was approved, our first stage would just be research, learning about, what citizen outreach has already done. And, if that's kind of seen as not being sufficient as to what is desired, that we would make a recommendation to hopefully improve that process. So unless there's any other questions or comments, I would move the motion and hope for a second.
Is there a second?
I
Karen
second it.
seconds it. Thank you. All in favor, raise your hand. All opposed? Karen, your hand's still up. And any abstained? Okay, looks like it passes.
Karen, you were a yes, correct?
I voted for it. My hands.
Oops, yeah. I voted in favor.
Great. Okay. Next up on the list is, is there anybody else that would be interested in being involved in that other than Karen? Okay, well, I think we'll need a third if we're gonna meet. I might just send out another email and hopefully we'll get another volunteer so that we can actually have the meeting. Next up is a Sustainability Commission funding letter. Essentially, late in April, the city manager will present a proposed budget that will go to the Budget Committee and the City Council. And basically, in prep for that process, I was thinking it might make sense for us to send a letter to the Budget Committee and the Council and manager, basically highlighting commission priorities and basically just trying to continue to build a relationship there. The two things that come to my mind as things that we would want to talk about would be some type of an update and a thank you regarding the $5,000 that we were given for grants, just to say that we've got our processes are going to be up and running soon, and thank you for the money, and we look forward to updating you on this next year. The other one was around a change that got made last year to essentially one of the two sustainability staff positions was moved from a long-term position to a temporarily funded position, and just wanting to make sure that that funding continues into the future so we continue to have great staff working on sustainability in the city. So that was sort of the idea behind this, is that we could have a couple people meet and basically draft that letter that then we could have the commission vote on next month and send off to then hopefully influence that process when it gets underway. Looks like Chelsea wants to speak.
Yeah, some of the details, like the way you said that, Zach, make me think that maybe there's some of the details that just aren't quite right. So I just would say whatever you end up recommending, if you want to shoot it my way before you kind of vote on it as a committee, I'd be happy to look it over just to make sure we're getting all like the terms right and the details right, so it makes sense for folks, because in that realm in particular, it really matters and can help build trust if we get all those little things right. That's all.
Laura?
This seems like a great idea to me, and I would be happy to help with writing the letter.
Art?
I agree. I think it's something we should do and try to figure out what's the best thing to do. And as Chelsea says, do it correctly. Since there's only one meeting involved, I'd be willing to sign up for that.
Any other questions or comments? Is there a motion to move? It looks like Zach is second. You're seconding it.
I'll make the motion.
I'll second it.
Thank you. All in favor? All opposed? Oops. And any abstain? Thank you. It looks like it passes.
Great. Art and Laura, I'll reach out to both of you. Is there anybody else that I should reach out to for help with that? Great. Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is actually a letter that I drafted regarding the commission process to bring our ideas to council. So largely this is something that I've talked about to the commission in the past, requesting that when we make our recommendations that there be sort of an additional step of us interfacing with council so that after we pass it and email it to council, we would actually be able to go and present in person, and then hopefully have that kind of feed into a smooth transition into the city council process that already exists in terms of a city councilor putting in a work session poll on an idea and having staff present, and then that making its way into an ordinance that then goes through the public process of having public hearings and eventually getting voted on. So what I've done here is essentially say, this is what our current commission process is up above. And then can you scroll down a tiny bit, please, Samantha? And then the current council process is down below, and basically asking that this intermediate process, this intermediate step of us being allowed to come and present would get included. The reason that I drafted this letter was that essentially, as chair, I have been advocating for this. And this is a way of actually trying to broaden that conversation to, hopefully, I hope I haven't gotten too far ahead of everybody, and that this is something that everybody else is wanting and hoping for too, so that we can hopefully approve the letter and kind of speak more of as a commission asking for this rather than me as the chair, asking for it. So that's where the letter came from and the idea behind it. And I look forward to hearing your thoughts and questions and concerns.
Louisa?
Yeah, sure. I think it makes sense. I would just, in reading it, it would make more sense to me if you put the current process before the recommended step, and then actually just state in the step that we would give 2 updates per year. So have a mid-year, because I like that idea and I think it makes sense to bundle recommendations together. But to just clarify that would be the goal, is to have 2 presentations to council per year where we put forward the recommendations, unless they're urgent, in which case it'd be hard to get in front of them in a timely way anyway. So just from a layout perspective, if that would help council sort of feel good about scheduling themselves in for something that they could hear from the commission twice a year, it doesn't seem like a big lift.
Laura?
Yeah, I agree with Louisa and making it really clear we're asking for twice a year. That feels manageable to me, and I could imagine it might feel manageable to them. And then, we might just want to clarify that if urgent things come up, we'll go to the public comment, and we are allowed to speak first as commissioners during public comment at city council meetings.
Mike?
Yeah, I think this is sort of at the core of what we do. So I think this is really good work, and probably, fundamentally something that, we should all be concerned with if we're working as hard as we are. I just wanted to ask Councilor Semple if she had any ideas on this, because this seems like she's sitting on the other side, and if she could maybe say a few words about this.
Well, it is really frustrating, and I understand the commission's frustrations. I have frustrations at council too. Zach lobbied really hard for us to have a work session on the last 3 proposals, and even the discussion of having the discussion has gotten put off. So I'll be very interested to see what's presented to us on the 19th as far as process is going. I think all of the commissions get short shrift when it comes time to communicating with council. So maybe this can be a leadership on that also. I don't know what the right outline or format for this interaction will end up being, but I think that it's an important topic for sustainability and the other commissions. So I would support us saying we want to talk about it. We need to make this better, council. So,
yeah.
Does that help at all? It wasn't much of an answer, but that's where I am.
Sure. Well, I appreciate your input. Because I'm on this commission, obviously we want us to be heard, but it seems to me one of the stumbling blocks of this is that everybody's got to have the same, it's almost a process that's got to apply across the board, not just to us, I would think. I don't know that, but that's just kind of a thought I had.
Well, right now, the commissions bring us their work plan and their report at the same time, it seems, once a year. And that's not really working together, that's getting reports. And the commissions, send us letters and ideas for work sessions and things, but we don't have commissions come and present to us about a topic very often. Usually it's staff that presents. So there's room for changes and improvements, because communication and working together is how we're going to have success. So there's a breach in the communication here.
Right. And sometimes the idea is complex, and it would probably really help everybody involved, not just our, make us feel good, but, and I know you guys do appreciate the education and the background, because you can't know it all, so I'm well, you could, we want you to, but you can't. But anyway, I appreciate this idea, and I think it's core to what we do. I very much support it.
All right.
Yeah, it's great, Zach, to get this together. And I don't think we need to tell the council their process. I think mainly what we're saying after you give our 7 steps, which is great, is really just to say that, we present our recommendation to council, and your last paragraph about, rather than scheduling it every time, we like a couple times a year to be able to go over the things we meant. As Mike said, everybody would benefit from a brief discussion of these things, and hopefully that would kickstart things to get them moving with the council. So I support what you got.
Oh, Zach, you had something?
Well, I just want to clarify something first, and then kind of make sure that I'm understanding what potential changes would be made. So the current process is that basically once for us interacting with council in a presentation type format, Right now, we do it once a year. Last year, I believe it happened around October, where our fiscal year starts in July, and it takes a couple months to maybe a month or two to put together our work plan for the year, and also our annual report for the previous year. And then we present that. Usually takes a couple months for us to actually get in front of council. So that usually happens in October. And so a mid-year and an end-of-year check-in would, ostensibly be in addition to that, initial, here's our work plan and please approve it. So just to clarify there. And then, so in terms of things to change, it sounded like there was a desire to basically add the request for a mid-year and end-of-year check-in to the requested step. And that maybe we don't actually need to list the council process. Did folks have thoughts on those two ideas of specifically including the mid-year and end-of-year check-in in the ask of the recommended intermediate step, and whether or not we can just get rid of the council process? Whereas my thinking was, it sets it up where we're asking for something where it's just a smooth transition all the way from beginning to end. Not to necessarily, yeah. So that was sort of my thinking behind it, but I'd be interested in other stuff.
Laura.
I agree with removing the current council process and then just making the one request of asking to present twice a year to them.
If there's no more questions or comments, is there a motion to move?
I move.
Thank you. And is there a second?
I second it.
Sorry, I have a question. Are we moving? We're moving the letter, but with that proposed change, correct? That we're going to take out the council process and we're going to add the request for a mid-year and end-of-year check-in to the request to present.
Thanks, Zach. Yes, that's what I meant.
Thank you.
Sorry, sorry, Mtima, can I clarify? I did not see who motioned first.
I did.
It was Mike.
Okay, thank you.
And then Karen second. And all in favor? Okay, looks like everyone is in favor. All opposed? Any abstain? Okay.
And I did want.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm so sorry, Mtima. I didn't mean to interrupt you again. The record that Kelsey did vote in favor of this recommendation before she left.
Thank you. And it passes with everyone voting in favor.
Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate your input and support for just trying to build this body and continue to make it more effective and work better in the future. So thank you. Last up, we have commission, council, and staff updates. Staff, do you have any updates? And then maybe we can just loop back on the things that Councilor Semple had started to bring up during council updates earlier.
Yeah, I would love to take a moment if I have one. First, I apologize that my camera is off. My network has been pretty wonky this evening. But I just wanted to reiterate the reminder about the belonging training that is happening again on Monday, March 22nd at 5:30 p.m. for boards and commissions. I will be sending the registration link out for folks with your weekly reminders that I'll actually be sending tomorrow, not Friday. I just again wanted to reiterate that the recruitment for boards and commissions closed on March 12th, and there seemed to be pretty good response for the Sustainability Commission. So that's exciting. And we'll hear more about that shortly. And then the last piece that I wanted to draw attention to is we've been posting the links for these meetings on the Commission's website using the Zoom platform. We are also, however, uploading these videos to the city's public meetings YouTube channel. And there is a playlist actually for Sustainability Commission meetings. So if that platform is easier for folks to use, I know we've had a little bit of trouble here and there with the Zoom platform. Feel free to use that as well. Of course, I'm happy to answer questions about how to access previous meetings if anyone ever has those. Chelsea, I just want to make sure, do you have anything that you'd like to provide an update about?
I'll just mention that we've been hearing a lot about the funding proposal, which is great. Great job on that. And a lot of it that we've been hearing is, well, we can't do this one or this one or this one. But I know you all said like, that's okay. Like we have 9 other things that we can look at. So just want to appreciate all the work you did on that. And also share that we had someone point out that there's been a revenue committee on the that was done by the budget committee a few years ago that went through a handful of the proposals that were in your proposal, if that makes sense. And so we'll send that out to you so you just have that information for future reference. But I think the big takeaway is I just wanted to share that we're getting a lot of feedback about that, and hopefully that conversation will continue.
Great, thank you to you both. On the belonging training, I'll just say that it is a good first step, and I would highly recommend any commissioners that are going to be continuing on into next year and beyond to take that training. And it's something that incoming commissioners next year, I'm hoping it'll just be sort of a normal onboarding thing to take that training, because it's a good kind of just initial introduction to a lot of things that we should all be aware of. Art, do you want to go? And then I'd like to go back to Councilor Semple's question from earlier.
Okay, I'll jump in. I just wanted to ask Laura, should we meet again with a fossil fuel bond just to put forth a recommendation, given we've had that meeting now, or what? Or do you want to consider the committee done?
Yeah, I was planning to send resources out to the counselors who attended. I know that Samantha will too, but and to everybody. Just, yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, maybe we could meet and just debrief, and I would be happy to do that.
That would be great if you could call it. I'm sure Jim would come, and who else was with us? Okay.
I mean, I'll just state as well that if I would see it as reasonable that if the commission felt that the information we got today raises this issue to the point that we wanted to recommend it to the council, that we could have a document that adds some flesh to the bones of what that might look like here. And this is what a sample resolution that has been provided to us would look like. That way, maybe the counselors that weren't here today, when the full commission made that recommendation, they would also get that information. It would also create a decision-making point for council in the future, such that when we do make that recommendation, they would hopefully get an opportunity to, direct staff to, do more or not do more. And so, my take would be, yes, debrief, figure out what the next steps are and recommend those next steps so that we can tell council to take those next steps, rather than assuming that they're going to do that based on the information that they got today. Looping back, Councilor Semple, you'd said earlier in the meeting, basically that the chance for the commission to present has been delayed. The council conversation about whether or not to have us present has gotten delayed to late April. And so
April 19th, our first meeting is the 12th.
You suggested that maybe one of the 3 proposals that we passed, that you could put in a work session poll in now and have council decide if they want to, have staff present on it at some point. Is that something that you're interested in doing, or commissioners?
I'm willing to do it. I feel that as your liaison, it's my responsibility to bring these communications. And you've tried really, really hard to get the mayor's attention. And I have also reiterated your requests. So I don't know whether, you know, what the plans are, if any, for this sort of work session. So I think since things have just been extended again, that it would be appropriate for me to bring from the commission a request for a work session to work on waste management at large events, considering that we've just moved up several letters and will be congregating. So we'll be having larger events. Council will either approve it, ignore it, or not approve it, but I don't see that there's any harm, other than my time, to put this forward. And I think that's, you know, from my own idea earlier in the meeting, telling you I think that's what I should do. I was gonna get in touch with the mayor this afternoon and say, hey, Sustainability Commission's meeting and large events are happening. I'm thinking about bringing a work session poll, but other things happened. I didn't ask her. So I think the appropriate thing to do is bring a work session poll about this one project. I think asking for a work session to talk about all the projects would be too much, you know, to get a good response, and always moving to separate when issues get conjoined. So if you want me to do that, it's on my list for things to do tomorrow. If I'm quick and don't get distracted by the next emergency, it's possible I could get it out in tomorrow's packet, which would be 2 weeks from now. If I'm not that speedy, then it would be 3 weeks.
So the
council's not back till the 12th anyway, so it would be moving along as quickly as we could.
So it sounds like the question for this group is, should Councilor Semple put in a work session poll on the waste management at large events, or wait until council has this conversation about whether or not to have us present, and then we would present then at some later date on all 3 of our recommendations? This would basically take the one and put it out ahead and put it on sort of a fast track. Thoughts on that?
Do that. I think it's the right thing. I mean, the other thing is going to take a longer discussion, if ever.
We would still be doing the other thing because that's a process work session that will be setting rules or whatever for everybody, but necessitated by our ignoring the Sustainability Commission.
Yeah, I think it couldn't be more timely too. I mean, this is, you know, coming into a lot of large events that are going to start to happen, you know, and it's the timing's right. So I let's do it.
And I was just gonna take the letters and emails that have been going back and forth, plus my experience working with Citizens for Responsible Use of Plastics, and write it. They're brief, so I think I could pull that info out and represent what you want. And if I can't, guess what? I'll email it to some of you and you can tell.
Happy to help, Councilor Semple. Sounds like everybody's supportive. So thank you for doing that, and we'll look forward to hopefully having that get approved. All right. Anything else? Karen, did you have anything else before we sign off here?
Yeah, thank you so much, Emily, for figuring out how you can help out and all that stuff. I really appreciate it. And with that question, would it still be helpful? We had talked about potentially Zach and I going to one of the city council meetings and presenting in public comment. One thing is to have the hearings with the Sustainability Commission, or the meetings, and to hear our proposals and recommendations and get some feedback. And the second thing was to bring up this idea of large events. So should we, I mean,
we've still got some weeks before that happens, and
right. Well,
we might have the answer about the work session before then. And at the moment, my tired, concussed brain doesn't remember exactly what your email said. So I will read it again tomorrow.
Well, no, it was something that we just talked about, and it I just wonder if you need.
No, you, there was an email about it. You and Zach, I think, wrote me something.
Well, maybe we just need to, when's our next Sustainability Commission meeting? Is it? Oh,
It sounds like if this goes in soon, we'll have our answer back on whether or not the work session has been approved. Around April 8th, there will be a public forum if people want to speak. Our next commission meeting will be about a week after that. And then council on, it sounds like the 19th is going to discuss.
The 12th is the next public forum.
Okay,
And
12th.
then, which was one we were gonna do process, but now that's gonna be on the 19th. So, you know, that's a good 3 weeks away. We should have some more information, but it would be before the next Sustainability Commission. And then the second chance would be after the Sustainability Commission. It never hurts to talk twice. You know, it's more effective to have 1 or 2 people talk at 2 different public forums than to have 4 people talk at one.
I guess I'm kind of lost now because our next Sustainability Commission meeting is the 21st of April, and there's the 12th City Council meeting in the 19th. So
you're right.
If you
And
think
my
that,
calendar has these little tiny numbers. I couldn't read them right.
well, let us know if you need us to come and present at one of those meetings.
Okay, all right, we'll be in touch. We're having a CRUP meeting before then.
All right. Well, we did a lot tonight, folks. Thanks for sticking through it with us. Thank you all very much, and we'll see you all next month.
Great job, Zach and Sam. Thank you. Thanks, Emily, too.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thanks all. Have a great night.